Welcome back to Cities on Console. Welcome if you are new. Today we will be coming through this week's dev diary. This week, of course, we're looking at city services in the game, including some things that are coming back from the first game, but in bigger ways, as well as a lot that is brand new in Cities Skylines 2. Just before doing so, however, I want to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and to drop a like if you end up enjoying today's video or finding it informative. And as always, please also feel free to drop a dislike if not. Any engagement is welcome and helps me improve the channel and make more of the content you all find helpful, entertaining, and worthwhile. But without further ado, let's get into the City Services Developer Diary. Brand new services join the many familiar city services, and while their basic functionalities remain the same, they have more nuanced and complex mechanics befitting a more realistic city building game. City services can also be restricted to districts, and we will also take a look at the city management options provided by districts and policies. Districts make governing the city easier with more detailed information available, while policies can be assigned to the whole city as well as directly to the districts, allowing fine-tuning of the various areas to make life more enjoyable for citizens or more profitable for the businesses. So all that's pretty standard procedure to this point. So just like in Cities Skylines, the original, you'll be able to section off districts and enact specific policies in those specific districts, but I'll be interested to see what kind of new policies we have and how they've kind of expanded that mechanic for City Skylines 2. Getting into an overview of city services. The basic gameplay of city service remains the same in City Skylines 2. Your task is to provide the citizens with various services that increase their quality of life, bring them happiness, and keep them safe. However, unlike in the previous game, where you wanted to cover the city evenly with all the different service types, the road to the perfect city in City Skylines 2 lies in understanding the needs of the citizens and fulfilling them by providing suitable services as well as other activities, such as places to go shopping. You can place the various services throughout the city, but doing so can be costly and provides only minor additional benefits overall. So this goes back to something we were talking about in the last video a couple days ago when we were looking at the featured highlights video. For those of us who played City Skylines 1, the original, it became a little bit annoying having to place, every elementary school, every couple blocks you need, a fire station, a police station, and it just became very redundant, and it really took away from the realism of the city. And not only that, but it just kind of took away from the fun of the game as well, in my opinion. Going with this model of upgrading buildings rather than having to just place a second police station or a second fire station, a second elementary school, being able to upgrade those and increase the capacity, the reach of the benefits, that type thing, I think that's super awesome, so I'm looking forward to it. But back to the article, where city services directly increased land value in the previous game, Cities 2 takes a different approach. City services only indirectly affect land value as they answer the needs of citizens and companies in the city, which in turn increases their willingness to pay higher rent in the area, thus increasing their levels and the land value. Furthermore, not all citizens have the same needs. Senior citizens have more free time and value places where they can spend that free time. Families with children, on the other hand, value areas with schools. Working-age citizens seek residences in areas that have quick connections to workplaces, and companies value services that increase their efficiency and profit margin. Citizens' needs can be inspected from their household's selected info panel by hovering over the family's happiness icon. Similarly, companies' needs can be inspected in their selected info panel, hovering over their efficiency value. So that's all pretty familiar from City Skylines, right? You'll be able to click on a household or click on a business location, and it'll tell you what their needs are, what needs are being met, and what you could be doing a little bit better with, and that can kind of direct you in what you need to build next, what you need to expand, what you need to focus on as your city's growing. So that's all pretty familiar so far. But then we get into service types. And the first thing we're going to look at under service types is roads. Roads form the backbone of the city, providing buildable zones around them, paths for agents to travel on, and the basic infrastructure for water and electricity distribution as the water pipes and electric cables run pre-built under the roads. I think that is a massive improvement. Instead of having to, start with the ugly power lines and drag those all over the map, or run water lines in a very unrealistic way across the map. Having the electricity and water, so just your basic utilities, all kind of pre-built under the roads, and just having to connect them to, your power sources and water sources, that's a super welcome change for me as well. But moving on, the condition of roads decreases over time as vehicles travel on them, resulting in slower travel speeds and a higher chance of traffic accidents. To keep the roads safe to drive on and the overall road condition high, a road maintenance depot is required. It sends out a fleet of road maintenance vehicles that roam through the city, patching up worn down asphalt. So before moving on from this one, it's worth noting, so we've talked about, right, it mentions here, higher chance of traffic accidents. So this is a little bit different from in Cities Skylines 1. In Cities 1, it was, kind of good to have the road maintenance vehicles running around. That just kind of increased speeds. But there was no real downside to not having it. It looks like it is something you are now going to need to implement into the game to reduce the chance of traffic accidents, which is obviously, something that can lead to significant traffic impacts in your city, in addition to slower travel speeds from the road maintenance not being kept up. And we get into our first image of the dev diary here. So this is saying the road maintenance service keeps your roads in good condition and clean up after traffic accidents. So this is very clearly our road maintenance depot. We'll open that in another tab and have a look. So very good looking. And again, when comparing to the Cities Skylines 1 version, one thing I keep noticing throughout all of these dev diaries and featured highlights videos that are being released is that the buildings are much larger and more realistic, right? The road maintenance depot was actually of a decent size in Cities Skylines 1 compared to some of the different service buildings that were just like ridiculously small. But this is, a pretty massive building here, right? Where it's going to be able to send many, many trucks. What is this, like 10 different garages? Just on this side, you can't see what's on the back, but just a much larger building, much more realistic, and the asset looks really nice as well. But moving on from roads, next we have electricity. So electricity is one of the key components in running a city, of course. Most buildings require electricity to function, and citizens are not willing to suffer a lack of electricity for long periods before moving out. Businesses lose most of their efficiency when they are deprived of electricity, which causes their production and overall function to cease almost entirely, and will eventually lead them to going out of business as they can't make a profit and pay their bills. Cities Skylines 2 features various different power plants, from the green, sustainable, but quite expensive wind turbine, solar power plant, geothermal power plant, and hydroelectric power plant, to the raw, polluting power of fossil fuels in the form of coal power plants and gas power plants. Nuclear power plants represent the awesome power of the atom. It's expensive, but delivers enough electricity to power up almost any kind of city. These options here that they just named off, if I recall correctly, at least if you had all the DLCs, every single one of these was in Cities Skylines 1. But what we noticed the other day in the video is that the assets are, again, they just look so much better. We'll go ahead and open this one. This apparently is the gas power plant. It is one of many options to provide your city with electricity. But looking at that asset is it's just beautiful. So comparing that to the cartoony assets of Cities Skylines 1, along with the terrible ground pollution, discoloration, and the smog that you experienced in the original game, it just looks so much more realistic and just beautiful, really. Even for a kind of naturally not beautiful thing, right? A big, gross industrial power plant. Still just a beautiful asset, so really happy about that. Moving on to water and sewage. So it says, water and sewage provide your citizens with the basic necessities and include both familiar and new options. Lack of fresh water leads to people becoming unhappy, while companies' functions are halted as their efficiency decreases greatly. City services also lose much of their effectiveness if they are deprived of fresh water. That makes sense. Similar to City Skylines, surface water can be pumped from open water sources, and the water quality is affected by pollution in the water caused by sewage sources. Also makes sense, and definitely a carryover from the first game. Conversely, groundwater works quite differently in Cities Skylines 2. Unlike in the game's predecessor, where the groundwater was pumped by placing water towers anywhere on the map, Cities Skylines 2 maps feature groundwater deposits full of fresh water. These reservoirs have a limited refreshment rate and are very susceptible to ground pollution, so plan your water supplies accordingly. So it sounds like you won't be able to just slam water towers all over the map wherever you want, like we did in City Skylines, right? It's kind of exactly what this is saying here. So there's going to be specific areas of the map where fresh water can be pulled from, but it is going to have a limited refreshment rate, which means, of course, that we'd only be able to pull a certain amount from that area over a certain period of time, and allow that to refresh and replenish without actually running out and being massively detrimental to our cities or at least local areas' water supply. Makes sense. And it goes on to say that sewage treatment is a crucial part of city management. In Cities Skylines 2, sewage must be either pumped out of the water network and into open waters through a sewage outlet, or treated in a wastewater treatment plant where it's purified and pumped back into the freshwater network. The pollutants gathered from the treated wastewater become solid waste, which can be hauled to any of the city's garbage management sites. Both electricity and water are discussed in more detail in next week's development diary, which focuses on electricity and water. Okay, cool. So again, this all makes sense and is very familiar for those of us who played the original game. So it looks like we're going to have two options for disposing of sewage, but it's expanded on a little bit, right? So sewage can be pumped out of the network entirely and into the open waters, which is the option I always tried to steer away from in Cities Skylines, the original. Or the option is to use wastewater treatment plants, which is, again, what I always went to in the original game, where I could actually purify it, pump it back into the freshwater network. So I'm happy to see that back as an option. But one thing that they're expanding there, it says the pollutants gathered from the treated wastewater, so if you use the treatment plant, becomes solid waste, which can be hauled to the city's garbage management sites. It says make sure your water pumping services are nowhere near pollution to avoid sick citizens. So again, familiar for those of us who played the original game. We'll open up this picture here. And so we have the water treatment plant, it looks like. And one thing I've noticed here is it looks like a little JPEG of a little water droplet, right? On here, this one actually looks good. It just looks like a little water logo. But this one, it looks like kind of the same logo, but without the 3D effect to it and with just a plain white background, as if, again, it's just like a little JPEG slapped on the side there. I'm sure and hopeful, at least, that this is a, pre-build, whatever, that's things like that are going to be ironed out when the full game comes. I'm sure they wouldn't have a better looking droplet here without the ugly background and then have the same image with the stupid background plastered everywhere else here. So, but anyway, we'll move on from that. And then we move into healthcare and death care. So at their core, both healthcare and death care are relatively straightforward services and function much like they do in City Skylines. Medical clinics and hospitals provide health care for the sick and ambulance transportation for those too sick or injured to travel to the medical facilities by themselves. Additionally, healthcare services provide citizens in the surrounding area with a passive health bonus, while ambulances will respond to traffic accidents, taking care of injured citizens and bringing them to a medical clinic or hospital for treatment. Improve your citizens' health with the Health Research Institute on the left and provide local healthcare services with a hospital on the right. So we'll pop that image open. So we've got the Health Research Institute. It was called, Health Research Institute is this large monstrosity here. It looks really cool though. I appreciate it. And then of course we've got a kind of a standard hospital here. And from the video we looked at the other day, I believe this is a wing that was added on to it. I think maybe just this rectangular part is the original hospital, and this is with actually a wing sort of added as an upgrade. So again, very good looking assets. Really, really excited to play with these. Moving on to death care specifically. Death care prepares the deceased on their final journey, transporting them to the cemeteries and crematoriums and hearses. Citizens can die of old age, if their health decreases too much, if they are involved in a traffic accident, or if they are inside a building when it collapses due to being abandoned or affected by a natural disaster. So again, if you played the original Cities Skylines, most of those options are very familiar. I don't really recall anyone's health ever getting so bad that they died. I don't know if that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that was a mechanic in the original game. I know that they would get sick, they need to go to the hospital, you have the sick waves if you like polluted or whatnot, but I don't really recall anyone dying from that. But again, correct me if I'm wrong. And here, a cemetery provides citizens with a final resting place and can improve their well-being too. Wait, what? A cemetery provides citizens with a final resting place and can improve their well-being too. So I'm guessing this means it improves the well-being of the people who visit the cemetery or people in the area, and not the people who are being transported to their final resting place. I think it looks like their well-being is probably long gone by then, not to be too grim. Anyway, this is the look of the cemetery, and again, just absolutely beautiful. Beautiful parking lot, the actual cemetery itself is nice with the hedges, so many burial plots going all around. I really like the landscaping. And again, just not even focusing on just the cemetery, but way back here, you've got looks like the European style. I believe this is the medium density housing we were looking at previously. Got the triangular shapes, and then you got some of the American style with the flat roof there. And then you got something here, wingbacks. Looks almost like a Buffalo Wild Wings or something. I wonder if that's what that is. Either way, it looks very cool. Looks like a real, shop or restaurant or whatever it's meant to be. It just looks like a real little complex there that you'd see driving down the street, at least here in the States. Continuing on, it tells us that citizen health is positively affected by the availability of resources the households use and their consumption, as well as the availability of health care. Negative effects on citizen health are different pollution types, previous illnesses and injuries, and any uncollected garbage. A sick citizen cannot contribute to their workplace and thus affects the company's efficiency. Therefore, it is important to make sure that citizens are healthy and are able to contribute to maximize the city's success. That's pretty cool. I mean, most of that, again, we're kind of familiar with, other than previous illnesses and injuries having a lasting impact on the overall health of citizens. And where it says here that a sick citizen cannot contribute to their workplace and affects the company's efficiency. I believe that is new as well. So really in-depth health mechanics here, it looks like. But moving on now to garbage management. And it states, every building accumulates garbage as a byproduct of humans living, working, or spending free time there. Various factors can contribute to garbage being accumulated, such as building and zone type, building level and size, as well as citizen education levels. Higher level buildings generate less garbage, as do citizens with a higher education level. That is exactly the same as it was in Cities 1, and I quite like that actually as a mechanic of the game. Garbage is handled by building landfills and other garbage management buildings which tend to pollute their surroundings, with the incineration plant pushing out a lot of air pollution as well. So they should be built far away from residential areas and preferably downwind to avoid the air pollution from affecting the city. It sounds like the wind orientation is going to be something that we're going to pay close attention to on the maps and in the planning process for building our cities. The facilities send out garbage trucks that collect garbage from buildings and bring it back for processing. Landfills simply store and slowly process the garbage while the incineration plant burns it, turning waste into electricity. The recycling center separates the usable parts from the garbage and turns them into resources that can be used by manufacturing companies to produce goods and products. Very cool. So a lot of that, again, familiar, and things like this, the recycling center producing resources that companies can use, totally realistic. This image states landfills, shown on the right, can take up precious land, while recycling centers, shown on the left, and incineration plants, not shown, can process garbage faster. And so looking at this image, again, we have the recycling center here on the left, and we've got the actual landfill here on the right. What looks interesting to me, though, is of course we talked about how you can draw these now, right? I'm guessing as the city grows, you might need more, land to fill than you did previously. And you see here, there's actually it looks completely separated by the road. I wonder if this is just kind of an expansion that you can sort of add on to the original landfill, or if there's a second landfill back here that is connected to. But I like the idea of the drawable landfills either way. And if you can add little modules here and there and build them around roads, that type of thing, then that just makes it even better, in my opinion. Moving on to education and research. So, education is an important service for a successful city, of course. You can provide your citizens with education by building various schools that correspond to different age groups. Children always go to elementary school if one is available, while teens and adults have the freedom to choose whether to go to school or switch to working. That's interesting that teens have the freedom to drop out after elementary school. I guess there's no middle school in the game, so I don't know, but it still seems weird. But it goes on to say teens can go to high school, while adults have the option to either go to college or one of the universities available in the game. When choosing between school and work, citizens calculate which is financially more beneficial to them, to start working now in a lower position and earning money, or studying for a higher possible position earning them more money. Some citizens also simply choose to study or work depending on their inherent interests. Very interesting. Very cool. And we have an image here. Provide your citizens with a college education to fill well-educated job openings. So I'm guessing this is one of the colleges rather than one of the universities. And a really kind of a classical, nice-looking building here. And you've got what looks like an American football field out here. I wonder if that is a part of the actual school campus, like a modular sort of thing that you just add on, or if it comes with it even, or if that is manually placed separately, just to kind of how I used to do in the original Cities Skylines, where I'd sort of build my own campus by dropping, sports parks next to the actual schools and that kind of thing we're all familiar with from playing the old game. Or even if it's something similar to the campus DLC mechanic in the first game, where you did drop the actual separate sports complexes, but they did have a direct impact on the university or college itself. So I'll be interested to find out what's similar there and what's different anyway. And goes on to explain that citizens have 5 levels of education: uneducated, poorly educated, educated, well-educated, and highly educated. Every time a citizen graduates from a school, their education level increases by 1. Citizens can also fail to graduate, at which point they evaluate their options and either continue studying or get a job. That's new for sure. Education levels are important when filling job positions in companies and city services, as most of them have a certain amount of job positions for the various education levels. If companies can't fill all open positions with the applicable employees, so in other words, not enough workers with a high enough level of education, the service's efficiency decreases, and in the case of companies, their production output is affected negatively. Higher level companies have more job positions for higher education levels compared to low level companies, and in general, higher educated employees are more sought after than lower educated employees. As a special effect, elementary schools give a well-being bonus for families and children living close to the school. This encourages families to move into areas that have elementary schools and can, to some extent, be used to guide how a certain portion of the population behaves. So that totally makes sense, because in the real world, having good elementary schools is a massive reason for families with children to move to a certain area. That's like the first thing you research, right? When maybe when you were a kid, one of your parents was offered a big job, but they had to relocate for it. Probably aside from finding somewhere to live and how cost effective it was, probably one of the first things they looked at was school availability, right? If you were still school aged when that happened. So very realistic stuff. And it reiterates here, encourage families to move into an area by providing them with a local elementary school. And this is clearly an image of one of the elementary schools, which I believe is upgraded. I do believe the standard is a bit smaller. So this is with an upgrade applied, which adds, I guess, just kind of builds on an extra little wing to the left and right. if I'm not mistaken there. All right, and next we have fire and rescue. Fire and rescue services are quite straightforward, gameplay-wise. Having a firehouse or fire station present in the city decreases fire hazards in the area surrounding the service buildings. The fire department sends out fire engines to put out building fires, and as fires can spread quickly, it is important to sort out traffic jams so that in the case of an emergency, the fire engines are not stuck behind traffic while trying to reach their destination. Totally makes sense. It says the fire station is ready to respond to fires in the city and can be upgraded as your city's needs increase. Another nod to the upgrade system rather than just having to drop a fire station every other block, right? But we'll have a look at this one, and I imagine, again, this is probably one of the upgraded versions. You probably have something much smaller in the beginning, but just a massive and beautiful asset yet again. And then we have Firewatch Towers. So this is familiar from the first game, but only if you use the Natural Disasters DLC. The Firewatch Towers can be placed in the wilderness to keep watch on and lower the risk of forest fires in their surroundings. Forest fires can easily spread and light nearby buildings, so you will need the firefighting helicopter depot to send out their helicopter fleet, which can put out both forest fires and building fires. So I wonder if that is something that maybe doesn't affect you in the early game, because I can't imagine, in the early stages of developing your city that you can afford to be concerned with firefighting helicopters. It sounds like a lot to manage for a small town, but probably in the late game. And also, I imagine you could probably turn that off in Cities Skylines 2, just like you could in Cities Skylines 1, where maybe you just turn off disasters altogether, or you can turn on or off specific types of disasters, or maybe even manage their frequency. A lot of ways that could be managed, so we'll just have to find out what they're going with in the new game here. And it just reiterates, of course, build firewatch towers and firefighting helicopter depots to combat forest fires. We'll take a closer look. Might as well just look at all of the images that we have available to us. And the trees look great compared to Cities 1. The little firewatch tower, pretty nice. I'm guessing this is the helicopter depot in the back, and you can actually see an airplane back here. So looks like we might have an airport out behind. Very nice. Again, just looks really clean, really good. Fire and rescue service also includes disaster prevention and response. Fire engines rush to rescue citizens trapped in collapsed buildings, while the early disaster warning system detects natural disasters early and sends out notifications to citizens to take shelter. If the city has emergency shelters, citizens can hurry there and wait out the disaster. Very familiar to those of us who played the original Cities Skylines. And now I do imagine, looking at the function of emergency shelters, it has to be an optional thing that you can play with or without disasters. It feels like it would just have to be, really. And it states, emergency shelters provide a safe place for citizens during a disaster, while the early disaster warning system notifies them of an impending disaster. And that looks like a very nice water tower there. So I'm guessing this is the early disaster warning system. This interesting little tower here. Very cool. And then police and administration. Police keep order in the city, and their presence, be it police stations or the police headquarters, decreases crime accumulation in their neighborhoods. Patrolling police cars also encourage citizens to behave well, and they decrease crime probability along the roads they travel. Unless limited by selected districts, police cars can patrol the entire city. So sounds like by default, that is exactly what they will do. They'll patrol the entire city, but you can actually limit them to work in certain districts, which is much more realistic. You'd have a certain set of police managing or working in a certain locale. So you have city police, you have county police, and then that type of thing. So be interesting to see how you can sort of manage that and create your own little police districts and different levels of policing. And states here, the police headquarters keep your citizens safe and can detain criminals until they are transferred to a prison. Police respond to crimes and attempt to capture the criminal at the crime scene while the crime is in progress. Arrested criminals are put in jail, and some criminals are sentenced to serve prison time. These prisoners are then transported either to a local prison or to an outside connection to serve their sentence if a local prison is not available. That's pretty cool. So we did have the prison in Cities 1, but again, not a very in-depth mechanic. And it didn't really even matter. Most of the time I didn't even build one, and it had no impact on anything really. But there are going to be prison sentences in Cities Skylines 2, clearly, and it will have an impact on the game. Even to an extent that they will ship criminals out if you don't have your own prison within the city. So that's interesting. After serving their time, their criminal status is reset and they return to the city. Prisons function also as production facilities, producing resources used by manufacturing companies in the city. That makes sense. So a very realistic thing is, in some states, all of the license plates for vehicles are produced in prisons. So kind of a realistic thing. And it says here, put criminal citizens to work in a local prison while they serve their sentence. So this is very clearly a prison. Again, another massive asset. I wonder if this back here is some sort of expansion or upgrade. Maybe this was the original building. I can't make out what all this is here. I don't think it's connected. It looks like industry buildings or something. But very cool. Again, very nice looking asset and a really cool function to have in the game. Each building generates crime probability, which is the risk of a criminal selecting a building as the target of their criminal activity. Crime probability also affects citizen well-being, which in turn affects their chance of becoming criminals. Other factors such as lack of electricity, insufficient water and sewage service, pollution, garbage, and lack of leisure affect citizen well-being as well. Administration includes services such as the Welfare Office, City Hall, and Central Bank. The Welfare Office helps people down on their luck and boosts their well-being if their happiness is below half. The City Hall has city-wide effects ranging from lowered loan interest rates and import costs to reduce crime rates and building leveling costs. The Central Bank also helps reduce loans and boost companies' profits by lowering import costs while increasing export profits. So it sounds like all three of these buildings basically just provide benefits. So you won't necessarily manage welfare services that you offer, but by building a welfare service, it boosts the well-being of people who have below half happiness. So that's cool. And it says here, the Welfare Office helps your citizens get back on their feet when life gets tough. Again, very nice looking asset. Very modern, realistic looking, kind of a brick building, it looks like, at least brick colored. So very nice. And then we move on to transportation. Cities Skylines 2 features familiar public transportation options from buses and taxis to trains, trams, subways, ships, and airplanes, in addition to the automatic cargo transportation by road via delivery trucks. Cargo transportation for rail, water, and air makes a return, giving you more control than before. Each land transport type features its own depot from which they send out their fleet of vehicles. The harbors and airports are connected to the seaways and outside connections respectively. Airports are the only transportation building that can be upgraded to also include a cargo terminal, as their transportation types have separate passenger and cargo stations and terminals. And it states that both citizens and businesses benefit from a robust public transportation network. Of course. And then just taking a look at the beautiful train here. Very good looking station. Again, really good looking trees. The ground, the sky, everything just looks it looks really good. The reflections on the side of the train as well. That's definitely worth noting. And the shadows, lighting effects, good stuff. And then we get into one of my favorite things, parks and recreation. Not the show with Ron Swanson, but the things you need to focus on in your city for it to be A, beautiful, and B, make your citizens happy. Starts by saying parks and recreation fill a different role in Cities Skylines 2 than in the previous game where they affected land value directly. Placing a lot of them in the city was beneficial as they saturated the area, greatly increasing land value. However, in Cities 2, parks, plazas, tourist attractions, and landmarks, or any other city service building, don't directly increase land value. They mentioned this earlier. Instead, they answer to the citizens' various needs, and if their needs are met, citizens find the area where they live appealing, and this increases the land value as the citizens are willing to continue living there and paying higher rent. Parks provide citizens with outdoor activities to fulfill their need for leisure, and here we have very nice looking tennis courts, looks like, and little jungle gyms around. Really nice looking park. I can't quite make out what this is on the far side here, but very good looking asset again, either way. Parks and recreation buildings offer citizens options where they can spend their free time fulfilling their leisure demands, which in turn positively affects their well-being. This need for leisure can be fulfilled in many different ways, such as going shopping in a commercial area, enjoying entertainment and meals in places like restaurants, and visiting the various city parks, plazas, sports venues, tourist attractions, and landmarks. Weather and time of year have an effect on citizens' choices to fulfill their leisure demands. Warm and sunny weather encourages them to spend time outdoors and in the parks, while rainy or cold weather makes them choose indoor activities such as shopping instead. So that is really cool, very realistic. You wouldn't see that in Cities Skylines 1. You'd have people just outside in the rain, no matter what. Nobody changed what they were doing. So I think that just adds another kind of little piece to the depth of realism that they're going for here. Parks and recreation buildings also have an attractiveness value, that sounds familiar from the original game, which affects how attractive the city is for tourists by adding to the city attractiveness. Tourists stay at local hotels within the city and make decisions about visiting city attractions based on their distance from the hotel and the location's attractiveness value. Tourists may choose a more attractive park or landmark further away if the net result is faster fulfilled leisure demand, regardless of the travel time and cost. Tourists are specifically interested in visiting the various tourist attractions and landmarks. Both parks and tourist attractions increase your city's attractiveness. And this is a really nice shot here. You got some really cool looking monument right beside a soccer pitch. I can't make out what this is here. Looks like an amphitheater or something almost. Beautiful bridges in the background and on the side here. Really can't wait to play this game because it just looks great. Moving on to communications. Communications is a new service category in Cities 2 and includes the familiar post service as well as the new telecom service, which provides the citizens and companies with an internet connection. Post services fulfill the citizens, companies, and city services needs to send and receive mail. When citizens are able to send and receive mail, they gain a well-being boost, which contributes to their happiness, while being unable to send postcards to their friends and family, love letters to their loved ones, and opinionated letters to the editor decreases their well-being. Similarly, companies and city services benefit greatly from functioning post service with an increase in efficiency when their mail is collected and delivered. The post office sends out post vans to collect mail from mailboxes used by private citizens to send mail and directly from companies and city services. The collected mail is stored in the post office until it is either sent to an outside connection or a post sorting facility. The post sorting facility sorts the mail into local and long distance mail, which is then delivered back to the city and to outside connections respectively. Without the local post sorting facility, all mail sent from the city is transported to outside connections as long distance mail, and only mail coming from outside connections can be delivered within the city. The post office will collect and distribute mail in your city, and we get a nice little image of the post office here. And this is kind of similar to the little water droplet thing that we were looking at on the water treatment plan before. You got the nice little logo here on the front, but then in the back, again, you have this white background behind it. I don't know if that is just how it's going to be in the game, or if, again, that's something that's going to be cleaned up and it should just have this logo in place there. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but it definitely looks nice here. Not quite as nice here, but we'll see how that goes. Telecommunications is all about providing citizens and companies with a high-speed internet connection. Each citizen, be it a resident in an apartment building, a worker in a company, or a student in a school, uses a small portion of the available network bandwidth, 1 gigabit per second, apparently, And each telecom building has a bandwidth capacity and range describing how many citizens it can service and how far its service reaches. Good telecommunications service coverage increases citizen well-being as it provides them with recreation, fulfilling their leisure demand. The amount of well-being a citizen gains from using the internet depends on the strength of the network signal, which is always strongest near the source of the signal and decreases as you get further away. So that's pretty realistic and reasonable. Commercial companies benefit from telecommunications by increasing their sales as citizens are able to shop online, while industrial companies get better deals from resource providers as they are able to communicate better and have a wider reach, resulting in lower material costs, which in turn increases the company's profit margin. Very cool mechanic, as again, all that is very realistic. Both the server farm on the left and telecom tower on the right provide telecom coverage in the city. So that's really cool. I did not know that's what we were looking at here. So the telecom tower is on the right. That's, pretty clear what that is. Server farm. I didn't realize that's what this asset was. Very big asset. Again, all these buildings are kind of true to scale, right? Of what they would be in the real world. And just a massive asset. If that's just filled with servers, I imagine it to be much stronger than this little tower here, but who knows? We'll just have to wait till the game comes out to find out, I guess. Then we get into landscaping. Landscaping has remained largely the same in Cities 2. In the terraforming section, you're able to adjust the terrain to suit your city building needs by using the familiar tools: shift terrain, level terrain, soften terrain, and slope terrain. But landscaping also includes options to plant trees, which have a life cycle in Cities 2, where they grow older and bigger as time goes on. Placing new trees on the map using the tools in landscaping's vegetation menu plants tree saplings that eventually grow into mature trees. Similarly, if a forest fire destroys a part of a forest, it will take time for new trees to grow in place of the old burned trees. And let's just have a look at the menu, which looks almost identical to Cities 1, so nothing super new there. Terraform the landscape or plant trees from the landscaping menu. Pathways are another familiar feature in the landscaping menu, enabling you to create pavement paths for pedestrians, including various styles of pedestrian bridges. As citizens make pathfinding decisions, one of the options to move around the city is, of course, walking. If there are pathways allowing quick access to various parts of the city, then citizens may choose walking over driving private cars or public transportation. The best part is, not only does walking not contribute to traffic congestion, but it is free, so the citizens have more money to spend elsewhere. Pedestrian paths provide citizens with shortcuts through terrain or options to bypass roads. And here's just a view of some pedestrian paths here, and I guess one of the pedestrian bridges coming across. Much more realistic size than those big blobby ones we had in the original Cities Skylines. They look more like actual, sidewalks, pedestrian paths, as they should. So again, looks like an improvement. And then finally, after getting through all the types of services, we now are looking at service upgrades. A new feature in Cities 2 is the City Services upgrade system. In the previous game, city services were one-and-done buildings, which, as we talked about earlier, I was not a huge fan of. You placed the building, and if the city needed more to the service type, you just placed another building of the same type. In Cities 2, each city service building, with few exceptions, is upgradable, extending its operations to service more citizens and answer different needs of the citizens. Upgrades can add new functionality or expand the existing functionalities of a service building. For example, you can place an ambulance depot or an extension wing to a medical clinic to add more ambulances and patient capacity. Similarly, placing an extension wing to an elementary school increases student capacity, while placing a children's clinic or a playground improves student health and well-being respectively, both adding new effects to the elementary school. So that's actually really cool that there's going to be sort of two different focuses for upgrades, whether, like they just said, an extension wing to support more students, or add a children's clinic to the school or a playground to improve health and well-being. Very cool. Moving on, a power plant can have additional turbines built, increasing the electricity output, and exhaust filter added to decrease the amount of air pollution created by the plant, or additional storage space for storing fuel. Upgrades come in many forms, and improve service buildings in many different ways. It's worth noting that adding upgrades costs money, and in most cases the upgrades also add to the building's upkeep costs. It may not always be beneficial to build all upgrades for a building, but instead to consider the needs of the city and its citizens. Is the exhaust filter necessary for that power plant, which is already downwind from the city and the air pollution spreads away from residential areas? Maybe not. But if the power plant is located near the city center and was built in the early days of the city, the exhaust filter might be exactly what the plant needs. It can continue to operate closer to the city without causing too much harm with its air pollution. If the school is already full of students, but more eligible citizens are in the city, is it better to upgrade the school with additional capacity or to build an entirely new school in another part of the city? This depends on where the students are located, as providing them with nearby facilities cuts travel time and contributes less to traffic congestion. So I really like this. It sounds like something you're really going to have to put some thought into. There will be certain situations in which you will want to build that second school, but there will be many in which you just want to expand the one that you already have, especially in the early game, I imagine. Whereas, building a new school, that might come much later in the game, once you've grown the size of the city quite a bit and spread out across the map. Service upgrades are divided into 3 categories. Okay, cool, so we are going to get into that. Operational extensions and sub-buildings. Operational upgrades add functional and statistical changes to the building without changing its looks. These can be bandwidth increases for the radio mast, exhaust filters installed in a coal power plant, or a dispatch center built inside the taxi depot. Extensions are visible upgrades connected directly to the main building, usually increasing the building's capacity for vehicles, output, range, or the number of citizens being serviced. These include, among other things, extension wings for medical facilities and schools, providing more patient and student capacity, respectively. Garages for various services, increasing the size of their service vehicle fleet. And additional turbines for power plants, increasing their electricity output and fuel consumption. Extensions have a fixed position on the building lot and fit inside the existing lot size. But moving on to the third and final upgrade type. So sub-buildings are separate buildings attached to the service building's existing lot. They can increase, for example, the fuel storage capacity of power plants or add new functionality to a building, such as the aforementioned children's clinic and playground upgrades for an elementary school. Sub-buildings naturally require additional space to be built, so it is important to take into consideration the placement of the service buildings and make sure that there is enough free space around them for these potential sub-buildings to be added in the future. So that actually goes back to what we just talked about. So it sounds like it's going to be a little bit of both. The wing upgrades or upgrades to the extensions, as they called it, right? The ones that are kind of the building itself being expanded. Those will be in the predetermined lot size. So you won't need any extra area for that, but you will need to plan for more room to add these sub-buildings. So a little bit of both there. And down here, this image, it says we can add a disaster response unit to your fire station to search for survivors in collapsed buildings. To the right here, we have our fire station, and this is one of the quote-unquote sub-buildings, which is a disaster response unit, it looks like. Just to the left of our main fire station, we can add that on. And then we get into service coverage. In Cities 2, services have both a passive coverage effect and a simulated effect. While the passive effect is local to the area surrounding the building, the simulated effect can reach further into the city through patrolling vehicles or citizens visiting the service building. And often the two work in tandem. As an example, managing the city's crime rate isn't about placing a police station on every street corner. Instead, the police station's presence decreases the accumulation of crime in its neighborhood as its passive coverage effect, while the patrolling police vehicles extend that reach to all over the city as the simulated effect. Many of the city's services have a passive effect that spreads to their surroundings along roads. Services with passive effects include healthcare facilities, health bonus, education in elementary schools, well-being bonus for families with children, fire department facilities decreases fire hazard, police department facilities decrease crime accumulation, parks and recreation buildings provide a well-being bonus, and welfare offices provide a well-being bonus for citizens whose happiness is low. Again, earlier it said if their happiness is below half. That's where the welfare offices come into play. The strength of the passive effect depends on 3 factors: range, capacity, and magnitude. Range is the maximum distance in meters along roads where the service building still provides its passive effect. Capacity is a rough estimate of how many people the city services building's passive effect reaches as it travels on the roads. However, the reach of the effect can vary greatly depending on how many people live in its vicinity. If there are only low-density housing, the reach can be far, but if the area is densely populated with medium or high-density housing, the reach can be quite short as it is used up faster, spreading through the apartment buildings. Magnitude is the maximum effect gained from the passive service coverage. It's at full effect within most of its range, but the effect fades out quickly at the edge. This area is where, as an example, your citizens will only have a few bars on their cell phone and their internet may be unreliable, making some overlap of passive service coverage worth it if you are aiming for the best coverage. Awesome. And then we move into service efficiency. In cities too, one of the most important aspects of both businesses and city services is their efficiency value, which represents how well the building performs its function. In the case of city services, efficiency affects the building's capacity, processing speed, or output, depending on whichever value or values are the most relevant for the city service. And it may also have an effect on the range of passive service coverage effects and citywide effects of certain service buildings. Below are the functions affected by efficiency for each service type. Roads, number of available road maintenance vehicles, electricity, the electricity output level. For water and sewage, water output level and sewage processing speed. For healthcare and death care, treatment bonus, processing speed of the deceased, and number of available ambulances and hearses. Garbage management, garbage processing speed, and number of available garbage trucks. Education and research, graduation bonus. Fire and rescue, number of available fire engines. For police and administration, the number of available police cars. For transportation, the number of available transportation vehicles. Parks and recreation, the attractiveness value, number of available park maintenance vehicles, and lastly for communication, the number of available post vehicles, network range, and capacity. And then we get into how efficiency is calculated. Many factors contribute to a building's efficiency. Some are essential for the building to even work, while others are important, but lacking some doesn't necessarily halt the building's functionality. Water and electricity are the basic needs for a building to function, and lacking either of them incurs a large efficiency penalty, while lacking both leads to the building becoming inoperative. Employees are an important factor when it comes to building efficiency, as having the right amount of employees who are happy, healthy, and have the right education levels ensures that the buildings function as smoothly as possible. Employee happiness gives a boost to efficiency, while unhappy employees incur a penalty. If employees become sick, they can't contribute to their workplace's efficiency, which incurs a penalty. And the inability to find employees who are suitably educated will also have a negative impact on the building's efficiency. As a reminder, highly educated employees are able to fill job positions requiring lower education levels, but it is impossible for a lower educated employee to fill a higher education level position. So that makes sense, right? Like in the real world, you might be overqualified for a job, and you could argue that a lot of people are underqualified for jobs they have. But generally, as a general rule, if you just need a job, you can always apply and probably get a job you're overqualified for, right? But you can't go out and apply for a job you need a couple of degrees for and you don't have those. Not really something you're going to be able to pull off. And here we have, looks like a hospital. It says happy employees of the right education levels increase efficiency, but make sure your services don't run out of resources. So we'll open that up. And yeah, so this is a hospital. Shows a 98% efficiency. That's pretty solid. Looks like it only has 40 of a possible 66 employees. No patients. So I wonder if this was just built maybe. The storage is also very low. And only 1 of 31 vehicles are in use. And 1 in maintenance. Moving on, it states that some service buildings, such as mini power plants, use fuel or other resources to function. As an example, if a power plant does not have access to fuel for any reason, its efficiency decreases greatly. In the case of power plants, the resource can also be immaterial, such as wind and sun. A wind turbine loses most of its efficiency as there is not enough wind available. Makes sense. And similarly, during the night, the solar power plant does not produce electricity and instead relies on built-in batteries to keep the lights on in the city. Totally makes sense. That's how they work in real life, right? Medical facilities are another example of a service dependent on a resource as they use pharmaceuticals, which is a type of produced goods in the game, while treating patients. If the building runs out of this resource, its efficiency decreases, and as a result, the treatment bonus added to the citizens' recovery decreases. And lastly, the city service budget can be used to affect the efficiency of all buildings within a service category. Perhaps your city is still small and it doesn't require the full force of the service to function, in which case lowering the budget can be useful as it lowers the efficiency, decreases the upkeep costs, and cuts down on the service's vehicle use or other functionality. Or maybe your city is growing rapidly, but you are not ready to invest in additional service buildings just yet. In that case, increasing the service budget will increase the efficiency of all the service buildings, allowing them to service more citizens. So again, that is very familiar from the last game. And then we get into service fees, where it says in the economy panel, you will find a page dedicated to city services and adjusting their budget. The budget slider affects all of the services buildings equally, and its main function is to reduce and increase the upkeep cost and affect the building's efficiency. Expenses displayed on the panel comprise of maintenance, also known as building upkeep, and depending on the city service, resource costs such as fuel or power plants. The panel also includes service import and export information, as well as the fees collected from the city services that have them. Yes, that's right, some services collect fees from the citizens. These include roads, electricity, water and sewage, healthcare, garbage management, education, and transportation services. Electricity and water fees are paid by citizens and companies alike, and the fees can be adjusted in the economy panel. Lowering the fees increases citizen happiness and company profitability, but also increases the usage of water and electricity. Increasing the fee decreases citizen happiness and profitability, but also decreases the usage of water and electricity. Using these fees on their own or in addition to district policies, you can encourage citizens to conserve electricity, decreasing demand in the city. Adjust both the service budget and related fees in the economy panel. So the economy panel, under services here, budgets panel looks almost identical to how it did in Cities 1, which I can appreciate. I never had a problem with the UI there, but of course you do see some new items here with communications and whatnot. And of course, again, the numbers are much more realistic. You're not paying $1,200 simulated dollars a month for water and sewage for an entire city. It's upwards of 620,000. So more realistic numbers, but generally the same sort of concept. Citizens also pay a fee for healthcare services when they visit medical facilities to get treatment, while garbage fees are paid when garbage trucks collect garbage from households and companies. Additionally, citizens pay for education, with each school type having its own service fee, the cheapest being elementary school, and the most expensive, of course, being the university. You can set up roadside parking fees for districts and the various parking lots and parking halls included in the road service. Similarly, each passenger transportation line's ticket fee can be adjusted individually, which can encourage or discourage citizens to use certain methods of transportation as the cost is considered when they make their pathfinding decisions. And next we get into service trade. Whether your city is just starting out and you can't afford to build a service, or whether it's thriving with excess to spare, it can benefit from service trade. Services can be imported from or exported to neighboring cities through outside connections and apply to most services. You can save money by not building a service, but of course, imported services also cost money and it takes time for the service vehicles to arrive from outside connections. On the other hand, exporting services can be beneficial to a large and established city selling any excess to neighboring cities. Electricity, water, and sewage services can all be imported and exported. Electricity is transferred from outside connections through power lines and into a transformer station or vice versa. From there, it is distributed to the local grid, ready to be used. You can find power lines running through the map, making it possible to connect to your neighbors when you are first starting out. Clean water can be delivered to the city or pumped to neighboring cities via pipe outside connections, and likewise, sewage can be sent to and from outside connections via pipes built to the edge of the city. To import or export both water and sewage, you will need to grow your city enough to reach the edges of the map where you can create pipe outside connections. Excess output is always sold if possible, while keeping enough for the city's own needs. And if the usage increases, less is sold to outside connections. So I think this is really cool, actually. Not only can you, create your own networks to bring in traffic, so, connecting a highway to an outside connection or a waterway or a train tracks, what have you, you can actually connect any of your utilities as well. Which, as it mentioned, being able to connect to power lines in the early game, I imagine that to be pretty important, right? So maybe you don't want to spend a lot of your startup money on a power plant. You can just connect to power lines and pay the outside connection for the power that you're using. So I think that's really cool. And then here it says we can import electricity when your usage increases or export any excess you might produce. We got the image here of the electricity production is quite high. We are exporting quite a lot because we are producing more than we need. And so we are selling a lot of that, it looks like. And next it says, if the city does not have any medical facilities, citizens travel to outside connections to get treated. If they are too sick or injured to travel, an ambulance is sent from an outside connection to pick them up. Once they are treated, they travel back to the city. Similarly, if the city lacks proper death care facilities, hearses arrive from outside connections to pick up the deceased and transport them out of the city. Police and fire services can also be imported, although their response times are slow as they arrive at crime scenes and emergencies from outside connections. Also, the imported services lack the passive service coverage effects from their respective service buildings, which can otherwise decrease crime and fire hazards to begin with. Citizens wanting to go to college or university may travel to outside connections if the schools are not available in the city. However, traveling outside of the city for education may also encourage them to actually move out of the city for good. Therefore, it is important to offer the citizens the education options they need. Likewise, your city can export education and attract students from outside connections who want to study at the city's colleges and universities. These students move into the city to study, and in the process, they also become fully fledged citizens once they find a home. And then we get into the final subject of the week, which is districts and policies. Districts give you more in-depth information about the populace residing there, while policies can be applied to individual districts or citywide, bringing flavor and fine-tuning to different areas of the city. The district panel shows information about how many citizens live there, their average wealth level and education levels, as well as which policies are enabled for the district. Hovering over the happiness for the district will show you all the benefits and drawbacks of the area, giving you an idea of how you can improve that part of the city. Creating a district is quite straightforward. With the district tool, you define an area by placing corner nodes, and once you close the area, the district is created. This method is faster and more precise than in Cities Skylines 1, and the district can be adjusted after it's created by moving the nodes or adding new nodes to the edges. It's named automatically, but you are able to rename it to suit your city. And here just reiterates districts can be renamed and adjusted after their creation. So this shows here there's a drawn out district. It looks like these little corner nodes. So you just place those and then pull them where you need to, almost like a like using the snipping tool on your computer or something. Or it looks like it's going to be something like that. City services can be assigned to one or more districts, limiting their services to only those areas of the city. Services that have not been assigned to any districts will service the entire city, regardless of district borders. It is important to note that even though a service building is assigned to multiple districts, its passive coverage still only applies to its neighborhood. Only its simulated service effects, like its vehicles, travel to all of the assigned districts. District policies bring more city planning control over specific districts. For example, you can limit heavy traffic in a district to decrease traffic-based noise and air pollution, which in turn increases citizens' well-being and health. Installing speed bumps slows down traffic, decreasing noise pollution and the likelihood of traffic accidents, while setting up a gated community denies access to the district from all outsiders except for delivery trucks and service vehicles. Roadside parking fees can bring some income from the district, but it also affects citizen pathfinding as they now calculate whether it is cheaper to use other modes of transportation than their own vehicle if they have to pay for parking as well. Enable specific district policies to customize areas of your city. So this looks like another angle maybe of the same area we were just looking at. And we have a little slider here where we can adjust the roadside parking fee. We can enable these policies such as the gated community or heavy traffic ban they mentioned. So really cool layout there. City policies are different from district policies and have citywide effects such as removing the speed limits from highways or installing air filters for manufacturing companies in industrial zones to limit air pollution. Some policies have a cost or negative consequence linked to them, while others are more neutral. Taking our example of highways with no speed limits, this policy can make traffic flow faster, but it also increases the likelihood of accidents. Installing air filters decrease air pollution, but those filters need cleaning every now and then and increase the amount of garbage that these factories produce. City policies apply to your entire city and are found in the City Information Panel, which is shown here. Cities Skylines 2 includes 7 different district policies and 5 city policies providing different ways to customize your city. District policies are applied by selecting the district and choosing the policies you want to apply, while the city policies can be found in the City Information Panel. So there are only 7 district policies and 5 city-wide policies. That is a massive reduction from what we had in the original game. It sounds like they're kind of honing in on the ones that are important, though, focusing on those, and I imagine there might be more that come about with future DLCs and that type thing. But this brings us to the end of this week's Dev Diary. So what do you all think about city services in Cities Skylines 2? What are you most excited for? Is it any of the new services, or maybe some of the old services, or ways that we expand services rather than having to plop down elementary schools and fire stations and all that like every other block? That's going to be the top one for me. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And lastly, if you made it this far into the video, I truly appreciate you hanging out with me today, and want to ask you again to consider subscribing if you haven't already, and to hit that like button if you enjoyed today's video or found it informative, or even to hit the dislike button if not. But all that said, thanks again and have a great day.